They say you should never answer the door at 3 a.m. I used to think that was just superstition, the kind of thing paranoid people tell themselves to feel smart. I don't think that anymore. The knocking started exactly 1 week after I moved into apartment 4B. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I opened my eyes and stared at my ceiling, my heart pounding in the darkness. I checked my phone. 3:00 a.m. exactly. I waited, holding my breath, but heard nothing else. Just the silence of an old building settling for the night. I convinced myself it was nothing. A drunk neighbor at the wrong door. Someone playing a prank. The pipes knocking. All the rational explanations we tell ourselves when something doesn't feel right. But it happened again the next night. Same time, same 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Slow and measured, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. This time I got up. I crept to my door, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, completely empty. No one there. No shadows. Nothing. Just the flickering fluorescent light at the end of the corridor, casting strange patterns on the faded wallpaper. For 2 weeks straight, the knocking continued. Every single night at exactly 3 a.m. 3 knocks. Always the same rhythm. Always the same impossible emptiness when I looked. I stopped sleeping. I started having panic attacks. Dark circles appeared under my eyes like bruises, and on night 15, exhausted and angry and desperate for it to stop, I made the worst decision of my life. When the knocking came, I didn't just look through the peephole. I opened the door. And what stood in that hallway wasn't my neighbor, it wasn't even human. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because the ending of this story will shake you in ways you never imagined. And tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this story? Now, let's begin. Moving to Chicago in September was supposed to be my fresh start. After a brutal breakup and a soul-crushing job I'd finally quit, I needed to be somewhere new. Somewhere that didn't remind me of all my failures. The Riverside Apartments on North Clark Street seemed perfect. Vintage 1920s building with original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and that old-world charm you can't find in modern complexes. The rent was suspiciously cheap for the neighborhood. $800 a month for a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Park. I should have questioned that. But Marcus, the landlord, had an explanation ready. "Building's old," he said during my viewing, gesturing vaguely at the radiators. "No central air, heat's loud as hell, hot water takes forever, and we're between major renovations, so there might be some noise during the day." "Sounds perfect," I'd said, eager to sign anything that would let me start over. Marcus hesitated, his hand hovering over the lease. "You'll be in 4B, 4th floor, just so you know. The turnover's been high in that unit. Previous tenant only stayed 3 months. Why'd they leave?" "Said the building was too noisy. Some people are sensitive to old building sounds, you know. Pipes knocking, floors creaking, that kind of thing. I'd lived in old buildings before. A little noise didn't bother me. I signed the lease that afternoon, handed over my deposit, and got the keys to apartment 4B, my new home, my fresh start. The building was narrow and deep, squeezed between a coffee shop and a vintage record store. 6 stories of dark brick and tall windows, with a tiny lobby that smelled like old wood and decades of other people's lives. The elevator was broken. Marcus said it was temporarily out of service, which I'd later learn meant hasn't worked in 6 months, so I carried all my belongings up 4 flights of stairs. The 4th floor hallway was dimly lit by fluorescent fixtures that buzzed and flickered. The carpet was worn thin in the middle from decades of foot traffic, and the wallpaper, probably original to the 1920s, was faded and peeling in the corners. There were only 4 apartments on this floor, 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. My apartment, 4B, was at the end of the hall. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped into what would become my home for the next 3 months, though I didn't know that yet. The apartment was small but had character. 1 bedroom with a large window overlooking the street, a living room with built-in bookshelves, a galley kitchen with vintage tile, and a bathroom with original hexagonal floor tiles. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, and the radiators were already ticking and popping even though it wasn't cold yet. I spent my first day unpacking, arranging my minimal furniture, and trying to make the space feel like mine. My belongings, what was left of them after selling or donating most of my stuff from the breakup, fit easily into the apartment. A mattress on the floor until I could afford a bed frame, a small desk for my laptop, boxes of books, clothes in the closet. That was it. That was my whole life, condensed into one small apartment. As evening fell, I met my first neighbor. I was taking trash to the chute at the end of the hall when the door to 4C opened and an elderly woman stepped out. She must have been in her 80s, with white hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that assessed me immediately. "You're the new tenant in 4B, she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Alex. Just moved in today." "Dorothy," she said, not offering her hand. "I've been in 4C for 41 years, seen a lot of people come and go from your unit." Something in her tone made me pause. "Come and go?" "People don't stay long in 4B, never have. Even back in the old days." She studied me carefully. "How old are you?" 26. She made a small sound, something between sympathy and disapproval. "Young. Living alone?" "Yes, just me." Dorothy nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. "Let me give you some advice about this building. The pipes will knock in the morning, that's normal. The radiators clang when the heat comes on, also normal. You'll hear footsteps from 5B above you, that's Mr. Chen. He works nights. All of that is just old building noise, you understand? Sure, I've lived in old buildings before. But Alex," she interrupted, her voice dropping lower, "if you hear knocking on your door late at night, especially between 2 and 4 a.m., don't answer it. Don't even look through the peephole. Just stay in your bed and wait for it to pass." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm September evening. "Why? Is there someone dangerous in the building?" "Just don't answer. That's all I'm going to say." She started to retreat into her apartment, then paused. "And if you need anything during daylight hours, you can knock on my door. But only during the day. Never at night." She closed her door before I could ask anything else. I heard multiple locks clicking into place, at least 4 of them, maybe more. I stood in the hallway for a moment, unsettled by the strange conversation. What kind of building had rules about when you could knock on neighbors' doors? What kind of place made an 80-year-old woman install 4 locks on her door? But I was tired from moving, and my brain was fried from months of stress. I went back to my apartment, ordered pizza, and tried to shake off the weird interaction. Dorothy was probably just a lonely old woman who liked to tell spooky stories to new tenants. Every old building had at least one of those. I fell asleep that first night around midnight, exhausted and hopeful about my new beginning. I had no idea that in exactly 15 hours, my nightmare would begin. The knocking started on night 7. Those first 6 days were blissfully normal. I settled into my new routine, working my remote graphic design job during the day, exploring the neighborhood in the evenings, slowly making the apartment feel like home. I heard all the sounds Dorothy had warned me about, the morning pipes knocking like someone was hammering inside the walls, the radiators clanging to life at night, the heavy footsteps from Mr. Chen in 5B when he came home from his night shift around 6 a.m. All normal, all explainable, until night 7. I'd gone to bed around 11 p.m. after a long day of work and unpacking the last of my boxes. I was in that deep, heavy sleep that comes from physical exhaustion. Then something yanked me awake. Not a sound, at least not one I was consciously aware of, just a sudden, urgent feeling that something was wrong. I opened my eyes to darkness. My bedroom was silent, except for the ambient noise of the city outside. Distant traffic, a siren somewhere far away. I reached for my phone on the floor next to my mattress, 3:00 a.m. Then I heard it. Knock. 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 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my door. I lay perfectly still, my heart suddenly hammering. Who the hell knocks on someone's door at 3 a.m.? A neighbor with an emergency? The landlord? Someone at the wrong apartment? I waited, listening. Silence. No voices, no footsteps, no follow-up knocking. Just those 3 knocks, and then nothing. After 5 minutes, when nothing else happened, I convinced myself I'd been dreaming. I was in a new place, adjusting to new sounds. My brain had probably manufactured the knocking out of some random noise. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay awake for another hour, my mind racing, jumping at every small sound. Finally, around 4:30 a.m., I drifted off again. The next night I made sure to go to bed earlier, determined to get a full night's sleep. I was exhausted from the previous night's disruption. I fell asleep around 10 p.m. and woke up at exactly 3:00 a.m. This time, I knew immediately why I'd woken. The knocking was already in progress. I'd woken to the second knock. Knock, knock. And then the third, knock. I sat up in bed, my pulse racing. This wasn't a dream. Someone was actually knocking on my door. I grabbed my phone, turned on its flashlight, and crept out of my bedroom into the main living area. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through my windows. I approached the front door carefully, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. My apartment was a railroad style. Bedroom in back, living room in middle, kitchen and front door at the far end. It took me about 10 seconds to cross from my bedroom to the door. The knocking had stopped. Everything was quiet. I looked through the peephole, my eye pressed against the cold metal. The hallway was empty. I stared through that tiny circle of distorted vision for a full minute, scanning what little I could see. The flickering fluorescent lights, the faded wallpaper, the worn carpet, but no person, no one standing there, no one walking away. How was that possible? I'd gotten to the door within seconds of the last knock. There was nowhere for someone to go that quickly unless they'd run, and I would have heard running footsteps on the old wooden floors. I unlocked my deadbolt as quietly as I could and cracked the door open, keeping the chain engaged. The hallway looked exactly as it had through the peephole. Empty. Silent. All 3 other apartment doors on my floor, 4A, 4C and 4D, were closed. The stairwell door at the end of the hall was shut. "Hello?" I called out softly. "Is someone there?" No response. The building seemed to hold its breath. I closed and locked my door, my hands shaking slightly. What the hell was going on? Was someone messing with me? Playing some kind of prank on the new tenant? I went back to bed but didn't sleep. I lay there until dawn, jumping at every small sound, my mind spinning through possibilities. None of them made sense. The next morning, exhausted and caffeinated, I knocked on Dorothy's door. She answered after several locks clicked, peering out suspiciously before recognizing me. "Did someone knock on your door last night?" I asked without preamble. Her face went carefully neutral. "What time?" 3 a.m., 2 nights in a row. Dorothy's lips pressed into a thin line. "And did you answer it?" "I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty both times." "But you didn't open the door, didn't step into the hallway?" "I opened it with the chain on last night, but I didn't step out. Why? What's going on?" She studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to tell me. Finally, she sighed. "Come inside, quickly." Her apartment was a time capsule. Doilies on every surface, floral wallpaper, photos in ornate frames covering the walls. She gestured for me to sit at her kitchen table, then put a kettle on for tea without asking if I wanted any. "How much did Marcus tell you about this building?" she asked, her back to me as she prepared the tea. "Just that it's old, built in the 1920s. High turnover in my unit." "High turnover," she repeated bitterly. "That's one way to put it. Alex, in the 41 years I've lived here, 23 different people have lived in your apartment. 23. Most stay less than 6 months. Some leave after just a few weeks." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because of the knocking. It always starts the same way, exactly 1 week after someone moves in. 3 knocks at 3 a.m. It happens every night, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. And it never stops until... Until what? Dorothy turned to face me, her expression grave. Until the person either moves out or opens the door. What happens if they open the door? They disappear. I wanted to think Dorothy was crazy, that she was a lonely old woman who'd lived in this building so long that she'd started inventing stories to explain ordinary things. But the fear in her eyes when she said the word disappear was genuine. That wasn't the look of someone spinning tales. That was the look of someone who'd seen something terrible. "What do you mean, disappear?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Dorothy poured tea into delicate china cups, her hands surprisingly steady. "I mean exactly what I said. They open the door at night and then they're gone. Vanished. Their belongings left behind, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anything. Just gone." "That's impossible. People don't just vanish, don't they?" She sat across from me, wrapping her aged hands around her teacup. "The last person who lived in your apartment was a young man named Kyle, graphic designer, just like you, coincidentally. Moved in last March. The knocking started exactly 1 week later. He came to me asking questions just like you are now. I warned him, told him the same thing I told you, never answer the door at night. And he lasted 2 months. 2 months of knocking every single night at 3 a.m. I'd hear it through the walls. Knock, knock, knock. Same as clockwork. Then one night, about 10 weeks after he moved in, I heard his door open. Heard him say something, though I couldn't make out the words. And then, silence. The next morning, his door was standing wide open. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Coffee cup on the counter, laptop on the desk, keys on the hook. But Kyle was gone. Did anyone call the police? Of course. They did a missing person investigation, found nothing, no sign of foul play, no indication of where he'd gone. His car was still in the garage. His phone went straight to voicemail. His family filed reports, hired a private investigator. Nothing. He simply ceased to exist. I felt cold despite the warm tea Dorothy slid across the table to me. And before Kyle was a woman named Jennifer. She lasted 3 months. Before her was a college student named Marcus, different Marcus than our landlord. He lasted 6 weeks. Before him, she trailed off, staring into her tea. They all follow the same pattern. The knocking starts on night 7. It continues every night at exactly 3 a.m. 3 knocks, always 3. And eventually, whether it's weeks or months, they open the door, and then they're gone. Why don't they just move out if the knocking is so persistent? Why stay? Dorothy looked at me with something like pity. Some try, but the knocking follows them. 2 tenants I know of moved out of 4B and took apartments in other buildings. The knocking started in their new places within 3 days. They came back to the riverside, and it stopped immediately. That's insane. Yes, Dorothy agreed quietly. It is. I sat in her kitchen for another hour, asking questions, trying to find a rational explanation. Dorothy told me everything she knew, which wasn't much. The knocking had been happening since at least the 1980s, which was as far back as her personal knowledge went. The building's previous super, who'd worked there from the 1950s to the 1990s, had mentioned the same problem. It might go back even further, to the building's construction. Apartment 4B specifically seemed to be the epicenter, but 4D, the unit directly across from mine, also had issues. It had been vacant for almost a year because the last tenant there had also disappeared under mysterious circumstances. "What's in 4D now?" I asked. "Nothing. It's empty. Marcus keeps it locked, says he's renovating it, but I've never seen workers go in there." As I left Dorothy's apartment that morning, exhausted and frightened, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be another disappearance statistic. I wasn't going to let some supernatural nonsense drive me out of my home, not when I'd finally found a place I could afford, not when I was trying to start over. I would simply never answer the door at 3 a.m. How hard could that be? Very hard, it turned out. That night, night 9, the knocking came at 3 a.m. as expected. Knock, knock, knock. I lay in my bed, covers pulled up to my chin, forcing myself to stay put. Don't look, don't answer. Just wait for it to pass. The knocking came again after a pause. 3 more knocks, slightly louder this time, then again and again. For 15 minutes, every 30 seconds or so, 3 knocks, each set growing incrementally louder. Finally, it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Night 10 was worse. The knocking lasted for 30 minutes. The pattern was the same. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, but this time, after about 20 minutes, I heard something new. A voice, muffled, like it was coming from far away or through water, but definitely a voice. It was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words from my bedroom. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, to investigate, to look through the peephole and see who or what was out there. But I remembered Dorothy's warning. I remembered Kyle and Jennifer and all the others who'd disappeared. I stayed in bed, my phone clutched in my hands, ready to call 911 if the door was forced open. But it never was. The voice continued for a few more minutes, then faded away. The knocking stopped, and I lay in the darkness until dawn, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. By night 12, I was barely functioning. The sleep deprivation was taking its toll. I'd snap at co-workers during video calls, lose track of conversations, stare at my computer screen for hours without actually accomplishing anything. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under my eyes. The knocking had evolved again. Now, after the initial 3 knocks, the voice would start immediately, and I could understand some of the words now. Please, help me. So cold. Please, open the door. It sounded scared, desperate, human, and that made it so much worse. On day 13, I decided to take action. If I couldn't sleep and couldn't ignore the problem, I'd investigate it. I'd figure out what was happening and why, and I'd find a way to stop it. That's what rational people do. They solve problems. They don't just hide under their covers and hope the monster goes away. I started with the building's history. The Riverside Apartments were built in 1924 by a developer named August Riverside, hence the name. The building was originally meant to be luxury apartments for Chicago's growing middle class, with features that were modern for the time: indoor plumbing, electric lights, steam heat. I found old newspaper archives at the public library showing the grand opening in October 1924. The building had been fully occupied within 3 months, a significant success during that era. But I couldn't find any mentions of disappearances or strange occurrences in the historical records. I expanded my search. What was on this land before the Riverside was built? Property records showed it had been a boarding house from 1890 to 1922, which burned down in a fire that killed 3 people. Before that, going back to the 1850s, it was empty land on the outskirts of what would become Lincoln Park. Nothing obviously sinister, no ancient burial grounds, no sites of tragedy, no occult history. I tried a different approach. I contacted former tenants of apartment 4B through social media and old rental records I found online. Most didn't respond to my messages, but 3 did. The first was Jennifer Caldwell, who'd lived in my apartment 2 years ago. She agreed to talk on the phone, though she sounded nervous when I explained who I was and why I was calling. "I don't like to talk about that place," she said. "I've tried to forget it. I just need to understand what happened. The knocking. Did it start on night 7 for you too?" A long pause. "Yes, exactly 1 week after I moved in." "How did you know?" "It's happening to me. Right now. I'm trying to figure out why." "There is no why," Jennifer said bitterly. "There's no explanation. I'm a scientist, Alex. I have a PhD in biochemistry. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or supernatural bullshit. But something in that building..." She trailed off. "What happened the night you left?" "I lasted 3 months. 3 months of knocking every single night at 3 a.m. I tried everything: earplugs, white noise machines, sleeping pills. Nothing worked. I'd still wake up at exactly 3 a.m. and I'd hear it. And the voice. Did you hear the voice yet?" "Yes. Started on night 10. Then you're in the pattern. It'll get worse. The voice will get clearer. It'll sound like someone you know, a friend, a family member. It'll beg you to open the door. And the worst part is..." Her voice cracked. "The worst part is you'll start to want to. You'll start thinking maybe someone really is in trouble. Maybe you're being paranoid. Maybe you should just check. But you didn't open it. Not at first. But on night 87, yes, I counted. I was so sleep-deprived, so exhausted, so convinced I was losing my mind, that I decided to open the door just to prove to myself there was nothing there. To break the spell of fear. I made it to the door. I had my hand on the doorknob, and then I heard as she stopped. Heard what? Breathing. On the other side of the door, right there, pressed against the wood. And it wasn't human breathing. It was too slow, too deep, like something much larger than a person. And I realized that if I opened that door, something would be standing there. Something that had been waiting for me to open it for 3 months. I ran. I grabbed my keys and my phone, and I ran down the stairs and drove to my sister's house in Wisconsin and never went back. Marcus had to pack up my stuff and ship it to me. And the knocking stopped? After I left the riverside completely, yes. But for those 3 days at my sister's house, it followed me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and hear 3 knocks on her guest room door. She thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. But when I went back to Chicago and signed a lease at a different building, it stopped completely. As long as I stayed away from the riverside, I was free. I thanked Jennifer and called the next former tenant, a man named Eric, who'd lived there 5 years ago. His story was nearly identical. Knocking starting on night 7, the voice beginning around night 10, escalating intensity until he finally moved out after 6 weeks. He'd never opened the door, but said he'd been tempted. "It sounded like my mum," he said, "and my mum died when I was 15. Hearing her voice, even knowing it couldn't be her, I almost opened it so many times." The third former tenant I reached was Marcus, the one Dorothy had mentioned, not our landlord. He was harder to track down, but I finally found him through LinkedIn. He didn't want to talk much, but he did say one thing that chilled me. "I lasted 6 weeks. I should have left after 6 days. Don't try to be brave, Alex. Don't try to figure it out. Just get out while you still can." That night, night 13, I set up my laptop to record video of my front door. If something was out there, I was going to capture it on camera. I positioned the laptop on my kitchen counter, angled to show the door and the peephole, and hit record before going to bed. At 3 a.m., I woke to the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I stayed in bed. I didn't go to investigate. I just listened as the voice started clearer than ever before. "Alex, please, I'm so cold. I've been waiting so long. Please open the door." It sounded like my ex-girlfriend, the one I'd broken up with 3 months ago. The reason I'd moved to Chicago. It knew my name, it knew her voice. And that's when I realized this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just knocking randomly. It was targeting me specifically, learning about me, adapting to me. The next morning, I checked my laptop recording. The video showed my door static and unchanging until exactly 3 a.m. Then the image distorted, pixelated and glitched for about 30 seconds. When it cleared, the door looked normal again. No visible person, no shadow, no evidence that anything had been there, except for one thing. In that 30-second glitch period, if you watched carefully, you could see something. A darkness darker than the rest of the frame. A shape that was roughly person-sized but wrong somehow. And at one point, for just a single frame, there was a face, pale, elongated, with eyes that were too large and a mouth stretched impossibly wide. I watched that single frame over and over, my hands shaking. That was what was knocking on my door every night, and it wanted me to let it in. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore, not after seeing that face. The rational part of my brain kept trying to explain it away. Video glitch, compression artifact, my imagination filling in details that weren't there. But the primal part of my brain, the part that evolved to recognize threats, knew exactly what I'd seen. Something inhuman was standing outside my door every night at 3 a.m. I went to Marcus's office, really just a converted storage room in the building's basement, and told him I needed to break my lease. He barely looked up from his computer. "No refunds on deposits," he said, "and you'll forfeit next month's rent." "I don't care about the money. I need out of this building." Now he looked at me. "Let me guess. The knocking? You knew? You fucking knew, and you rented me that apartment anyway?" Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, I'm required by law to disclose deaths and crimes that occurred in units. I'm not required to disclose my noises. People have disappeared from that apartment. People move out and don't leave forwarding addresses all the time. That doesn't mean they disappeared." "Kyle Morrison, Jennifer Caldwell, Marcus Chen. Should I keep going?" His face went carefully blank. I don't know what stories Dorothy has been telling you. This isn't stories. I saw it. I have video of it. Video of what? The hallway at 3 a.m.? That doesn't prove anything. He leaned back in his chair. Here's the truth, Alex. I've owned this building for 8 years. My father owned it for 20 years before that. And yes, apartment 4B has high turnover. So does 4D. People hear noises, they get spooked, they leave. But in all that time, not one person has been hurt. Not one person has reported an actual threat. Just noises, just fears. What about the people who opened the door? Something flickered across his face. What people? Kyle, others. Dorothy said they disappeared after opening the door. Dorothy is 83 years old and has lived alone in this building for over 4 decades. She sees patterns that aren't there. She invents stories to make sense of normal turnover. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. If you want to break your lease, fine. Fill out the form, pay the penalty, move out. But don't expect me to validate ghost stories. I left his office furious and terrified. That night, night 14, I decided I wasn't sleeping in 4B. I'd sleep somewhere else and figure out my next move. I packed a bag and headed for the door. That's when I met my neighbor from 4A. I'd seen him in passing, a man in his 30s, always dressed in business casual, usually on his phone. We'd exchanged polite nods, but never spoken. Now as I locked my door at 10 p.m. with a duffel bag over my shoulder, his door opened. "Moving out?" he asked. "Just staying somewhere else for the night." He studied me for a moment. "Because of the knocking." I froze. "You hear it too?" "Everyone hears it. We just don't talk about it." He glanced down the hallway toward Dorothy's apartment, then at the closed door of 4D. "I'm Ryan, by the way. Ryan Torres. I've been in 4A for 2 years. Why do you stay if you hear it?" "Because it's not knocking on my door, it's knocking on yours. And before you, it knocked on Kyle's door. And before him, Jennifer's. It's always 4B, occasionally 4D, never the other apartments." "That doesn't make sense." "None of this makes sense." Ryan stepped fully into the hallway, lowering his voice. "Listen, I'm a therapist. I deal in facts, in psychology, in rational explanations. I've tried every possible explanation for the knocking: shared hallucination, mass hysteria, infrasound from the building's structure causing fear responses, but none of it fits. This is something else." "What do you mean, something else?" "I mean, something is in this building, something that's been here for a very long time, and it wants something from the people in 4B. Why? Why that apartment specifically?" Ryan shook his head. "I've been researching that question for 2 years. Best I can figure, it has something to do with the building's layout. 4B and 4D are positioned directly over the building's old coal cellar. There's a sealed shaft that runs from the basement up through the building's core. It passes directly through those 2 apartments. I think whatever this is, it uses that shaft somehow, lives in it maybe." I thought about the breathing I'd heard through my door. The deep, too slow breathing of something much larger than human. Something living in the walls, in the spaces between floors. Has anyone ever investigated? Paranormal researchers or... 3 teams have tried. None finished their investigations. They'd set up equipment, start recording, and by the 2nd or 3rd night they'd pack up and leave. Said the location was too active or too dangerous. One researcher told me he saw something coming up from the basement. Something that shouldn't exist. "I got it on video," I said. "Just 1 frame, but I saw its face." Ryan's expression changed. "You saw it, clearly?" "Clearly enough. Pale skin, elongated features, 2 large eyes. Wrong proportions." "Can you send me that video?" I pulled out my phone and airdropped him the file. He watched it immediately, scrubbing through frame by frame until he found the image I'd seen. His face went white. "Oh my God," he whispered. "This is the first clear image anyone's captured. Do you know what this means? That I'm not crazy. That we can prove something is here. We can show this to authorities, to researchers, to who, Ryan? Who's going to believe this? I showed Marcus. He said it's a compression artifact. Then we need more evidence, better evidence. We need to document everything, the knocking patterns, the voice, the appearances. We need to build an undeniable case. I'm not staying in that apartment to be your research subject. I'm not asking you to. But I am asking you to help me figure this out. Because if we don't, this thing will keep targeting whoever moves into 4B next. And the person after that. And after that. How many people have to disappear before we do something? He was right, and I hated that he was right. That night I didn't leave. Instead, Ryan and I set up proper recording equipment, multiple cameras with different angles, audio recorders, even an EMF detector he'd bought online. We positioned everything to capture what happened at 3 a.m. And at exactly 3 a.m. the knocking came. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, we were ready. The recordings from night 14 were extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. Ryan and I sat in my apartment the next morning, reviewing the footage on his laptop. We'd set up 3 cameras, one covering the door from inside my apartment, one positioned in the hallway, which Ryan had sneaked out to place at 2:45 a.m., and one showing the peephole view. We'd also placed audio recorders at multiple locations and an EMF detector near the door. At exactly 2:58 a.m. the EMF detector spiked. The readings went from baseline to maximum in seconds, indicating a massive electromagnetic field that had no natural source. At 3 a.m. precisely, the knocking began. The interior camera showed my door shaking slightly with each knock, physical, real impacts. But the hallway camera showed something impossible. There was nothing visible touching the door. The hallway appeared empty. Yet the door shook with each knock as if struck by an invisible hand. "Look at this," Ryan said, pausing the hallway footage. "See that distortion?" He was right. Where the camera showed empty air in front of my door, there was a subtle visual distortion, like heat shimmer or the way air looks above hot pavement. And within that distortion, if you looked carefully, you could see a shape. Something roughly human-sized, but with proportions that were subtly wrong. "It's there," I said. "We just can't see it clearly." "It's like it exists slightly out of phase with normal reality," Ryan suggested. "Visible in certain conditions, like video glitches and electromagnetic anomalies, but mostly invisible to the naked eye." The audio recordings were worse. The knocking came through clearly, 3 solid impacts. But underneath the knocking, there were other sounds, breathing, movement, and something that might have been whispering in a language I didn't recognize. And then the voice started. On the recording, it sounded different than it had seemed in person. In person, it had sounded like my ex-girlfriend. But on the recording, it sounded like dozens of voices speaking in unison, creating the illusion of a single voice through overlap and harmony. "Alex, please. So cold. Waiting so long. Open the door." "That's not one voice," Ryan said, enhancing the audio. "That's at least 20 different voices speaking the same words simultaneously, like a chorus. 20 people? Or one entity that contains 20, or absorbs 20? Or—" He stopped. "You said Dorothy told you about previous tenants who disappeared after opening the door. How many did she mention specifically?" I thought back. "Kyle, Jennifer, and another Marcus. But she implied there were more over the years." "What if they didn't disappear?" Ryan asked quietly. "What if they're still here? What if that thing absorbed them somehow? And they're all in there together, calling out to the next victim?" The idea made me physically ill. Kyle's voice among that chorus, Jennifer's, all the others who'd been taken over the decades, still conscious somehow, still aware, but trapped inside something inhuman and forced to lure others to the same fate. "We need to call someone," I said. "Police, FBI, paranormal researchers, I don't care who, someone with authority." "I already tried. Before you moved in, after Kyle disappeared, I called the police. They did a welfare check, filed a missing person report, and found nothing. I called a paranormal investigation team. They left after one night. I even tried to contact that show, you know, the one with the ghost hunters. They never responded." "So what do we do?" Ryan closed his laptop. "We have 2 options. 1, you move out. We show this evidence to whoever will listen, and we hope the next tenant is warned. 2, we figure out what this thing wants and try to give it to it. Give it what it wants. It wants me to open the door so it can take me. Maybe. Or maybe it wants something else, and taking people is just what happens when we don't give it the right thing. That's insane. This entire situation is insane, but I'm trying to think rationally about an irrational situation. Ryan stood up, pacing my small living room. Entities like this, in folklore, in legend, they usually want something specific: recognition, release, revenge, sustenance. If we could figure out what it actually wants, we might be able to negotiate. Negotiate with a monster that's been kidnapping people. Communicate with an entity that's been trapped in this building for a century, maybe longer. Before I could argue further, someone knocked on my door. Not 3 knocks, not at 3 a.m., just a normal knock at 9 a.m. We both froze, staring at the door. "It's Dorothy," came the elderly woman's voice. "I know you're both in there. We need to talk." Ryan opened the door. Dorothy stood in the hallway, looking exhausted and worried. She held a large leather-bound journal. "I heard you two talking last night," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "About the entity, about what it wants." She set the journal on my kitchen counter. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, Alex. I know more about this thing than I let on. And I think it's time I told you the truth about the Riverside apartments and what lives in the walls." Ryan and I exchanged glances. "What truth?" I asked. Dorothy opened the journal. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten entries in different scripts and different inks, spanning decades, maybe a century. The first entry was dated October 15th, 1924. "This journal belonged to the building's first superintendent," Dorothy said. "My grandfather. He worked here from the day it opened until he died in 1967. He documented everything, every strange occurrence, every disappearance, every failed attempt to drive the entity away." She turned to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "The entity was here before the building. The Riverside wasn't built over random land. It was built over the ruins of the boarding house that burned down in 1922, and that boarding house was built over something even older. A well. A deep well that predates Chicago's founding. My grandfather's notes say the well was sealed by native tribes who lived here before European settlement because something lived in it. Something that would call to people at night and drag them down into the dark." "The well is still here?" Ryan asked. "It's in the basement, sealed with concrete and steel, but still here. It runs directly under apartments 4B and 4D. The shaft I told you about," she said to Ryan, "isn't for coal, it's the well. And whatever lived in it a century ago is still down there, still calling, still hungry." I looked at the journal, at the carefully documented disappearances spanning decades. 23 people from 4B, 11 from 4D. All vanished after opening their doors at 3 a.m. "So what do we do?" I asked. "How do we stop it?" Dorothy looked at me with infinite sadness. "My grandfather spent 40 years trying to answer that question. He tried exorcisms, blessings, salt barriers, iron, every folk remedy and religious ritual he could find. Nothing worked. The entity is too old, too strong, too fundamental. It's part of this place now." "Then I'm leaving," I said. "I'll break my lease, forfeit the money, and leave Chicago entirely if I have to." "That might not work," Ryan said quietly. "Jennifer said it followed her to Wisconsin." "It followed her because she didn't complete the ritual," Dorothy said. We both stared at her. "What ritual?" I asked. Dorothy turned to another page in the journal. "There is one way to break the entity's hold on you once it started targeting you, but it's dangerous, and it requires you to open the door." The ritual was insane, suicidal really, but according to Dorothy's grandfather's journal, it was the only way to break the entity's hold once it had marked you. 3 people have attempted this in the building's history, Dorothy explained, the ancient journal open on my kitchen table. 2 succeeded, 1 didn't, and he became one of the voices you hear calling from the other side. "Those are terrible odds," I said. "They're the only odds you have. Once the entity marks you, once it learns your name and starts using voices of people you know, you're bound to it. If you run, it follows. If you stay, it eventually gets you. The only way to break the bond is to confront it directly." Ryan leaned over the journal, reading the faded handwriting. This ritual, it's about recognition, about acknowledging the entity's existence and establishing boundaries. Entities like this operate on old rules, Dorothy said. Rules that predate modern understanding. They can't simply take, they need to be invited. That's why it knocks, that's why it waits for you to open the door. It needs your consent, however coerced. But the ritual reverses that, Ryan continued reading. By opening the door on your terms with specific protections in place, you acknowledge the entity's power, but refuse to submit to it. You essentially say, I see you, I recognize you exist, but you have no claim on me. Has this actually worked? I asked Dorothy. Twice. The first time was in 1936. A woman named Catherine lived in 4D. After 2 months of knocking, she performed the ritual. The entity never targeted her again. She lived in that apartment for another 15 years without incident. The second time was in 1971. A young man in 4B, he succeeded as well, and lived there until the building converted to condos in the 80s. And the one who failed? Dorothy's expression darkened. A man in 1958. He attempted the ritual but panicked halfway through, broke the circle and ran. The entity took him immediately. His voice was the first one my grandfather identified in the chorus. I thought about the voices I'd heard, 20 or more speaking in unison. 70 years of victims all trapped and calling out to lure the next one. If I failed, my voice would join them. I'd be conscious, aware, but trapped in whatever that thing was, forced to help it hunt for eternity. What does the ritual require? I asked. Dorothy walked me through it step by step. The ritual had to be performed at exactly 3 a.m. when the entity was manifesting. I would need to create a protective circle using salt and iron filings on my side of the threshold. I would need to burn specific herbs, sage, rowan, and something called devil's shoestring that Dorothy said she could acquire. I would need to speak specific words in a language the journal claimed was older than language, words that Dorothy said her grandfather had phonetically transcribed. And then, standing within the protective circle, I would open the door. What happens when I open it? I asked. You'll see it, fully, not just glimpses in video glitches or shadows. You'll see what it really is, and it will try to make you step across the threshold. It will use every voice it has, every trick, every lure. But as long as you stay within the circle and speak the words of refusal, it can't touch you. After 3 refusals, the bond breaks. You'll be free. And if I step out of the circle, then you're his, immediately, no second chances. Ryan had been silent through Dorothy's explanation, but now he spoke up. I'll be there, in the apartment with you. If something goes wrong, you can't help, Dorothy interrupted. The circle only protects one person. If you're in the apartment, you'll be vulnerable too. The entity might even use you against Alex, might hurt you to force Alex out of the circle. Then we'll do it when Ryan's not here, I said. Just me. No, Ryan said firmly. I'll be in the hallway, close enough to call for help if needed, far enough that I'm not a liability. I'm not letting you face this alone. We spent the rest of that day preparing. Dorothy brought the herbs and the iron filings. She made me practice the words of refusal, strange guttural sounds that hurt my throat to speak. She drew the circle's pattern on paper, so I could recreate it exactly. And she made me promise that no matter what I saw, no matter what I heard, I would not step out of the circle until the ritual was complete. You'll be tempted, she warned. The entity has had a century to learn what humans want, what we fear, what makes us act irrationally. It will show you things, promise you things, threaten you, but you must stay in the circle. Night 15 came too quickly. At 11 p.m. I began preparations. I cleared space near my front door and carefully laid out the salt and iron filing circle according to the journal's specifications. The circle was about 4 feet in diameter, big enough to stand in, small enough that I couldn't easily move around. 1 break in the circle, 1 gap in the salt line, and the protection would fail. At midnight, I lit the herbs. They smelled acrid and sharp, filling my apartment with smoke that made my eyes water. I positioned a small table within the circle with the journal open to the page of refusal words, a flashlight, and my phone set to record video. At 1 a.m., Ryan knocked on my door. A normal knock, not the entity's knock. I let him in, and he checked my preparations. "It looks right," he said, comparing my circle to Dorothy's drawings. "And you remember the words?" I recited them phonetically. They still sounded wrong coming out of my mouth, like my throat wasn't designed to make those sounds. But Dorothy had said they didn't need to be perfect, just recognizable. At 2 a.m., Dorothy came to check as well. She held my hands and looked into my eyes. "You can do this, Alex. You're stronger than you know. Don't let it win." At 2:30 a.m., Ryan left my apartment. He'd positioned himself in the stairwell, close enough to hear, but out of the entity's direct line of sight. At 2:45 a.m., I stepped into the circle. The salt crunched under my feet. I picked up the journal and held it like a shield. At 2:58 a.m., my phone alarm went off. 2 minutes to go. At 2:59 a.m., the EMF detector spiked. The temperature in my apartment dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on my windows. My breath came out in visible clouds. At exactly 3 a.m., the knocking came. Knock, knock, knock. I spoke the first word of recognition, acknowledging the entity's presence, calling it to manifest. My voice shook, but the words came out. The knocking stopped. Silence filled my apartment, oppressive, heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. Then slowly something began to scratch at the other side of my door. Not knocking, scratching, like nails on wood, or claws. I spoke the second word, the word of challenge, demanding the entity show itself. The scratching stopped. My doorknob began to turn, slowly. The deadbolt was still engaged, but the knob rotated anyway, metal grinding against metal. The door rattled in its frame. I spoke the third word, the word of invitation, the most dangerous one. I was inviting the entity to manifest fully, to show me what it really was. And then I reached forward, staying carefully within my circle, and unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open. I will never forget what stood in my doorway that night. The hallway behind it looked wrong, stretched and distorted, like I was seeing it through a funhouse mirror. The fluorescent lights flickered in patterns that hurt to look at, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. But the entity itself was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the ceiling of the hallway even though it was hunched. Its body was vaguely humanoid but elongated, stretched like someone had taken a human form and pulled it like taffy. Its limbs were too long, with too many joints in wrong places. Its fingers extended at least 18 inches, ending in points that weren't quite claws but weren't quite human either. Its skin was pale, not albino pale, but the pale of something that had never seen sunlight. Corpse pale, and it seemed to shift and ripple as if the skin was barely containing what was underneath. But it was the face that froze me in place. It had eyes, too many of them. They dotted its elongated face in a pattern that suggested where eyes should be, but then kept going, smaller eyes trailing down what should have been cheeks, larger eyes where ears should be. All of them were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just solid black orbs that reflected the flickering hallway lights. Its mouth stretched across the lower third of its face, far too wide, extending almost to where ears should be, and when it smiled, I saw why the previous video capture had shown 2 white teeth. They were human teeth, dozens and dozens of human teeth, far more than should fit in any mouth, all perfectly white and straight, all pressing together in a mockery of a smile. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls, from the air itself, from inside my own head. Alex. The chorus of 20 voices, all the people it had taken. You opened the door. You invited us. Step forward. Step across. Come with us. I clutched the journal and spoke the first word of refusal. My voice cracked, barely audible even to myself, but I spoke it. The word that meant, I acknowledge you, but reject your claim. The entity's smile widened impossibly further. More teeth appeared. Where were they all coming from? Its head tilted to the side, joints in its neck crackling audibly. Don't you want to see her? The voices asked. And suddenly the entity changed. Its form rippled and shifted, and standing in my doorway was my ex-girlfriend. Perfect in every detail, the way she wore her hair, the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the exact expression she'd had the night we broke up. "I'm sorry," she said in her voice, just her voice now, no chorus. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong. Come with me. Let me make it right." My heart lurched. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was the entity wearing her face. But seeing her, hearing her voice, all the pain of the breakup came flooding back. For a moment I wanted to step forward, wanted to believe that somehow she was really there, really apologizing, really wanting me back. "No," I said, and spoke the second word of refusal. The word that meant, "I see through your deception." The entity rippled again, and my ex's form melted away. For a moment it was something else, something that might have been its true form before it learned to mimic humans. Something made of angles that didn't exist in three-dimensional space, something that hurt to look at directly. Then it became someone else. My mother, standing in my doorway in her bathrobe, looking worried. "Baby, what are you doing? You look so tired. Come here. Let me take care of you." I hadn't talked to my mother in 3 months. We'd had a falling out before I left for Chicago. Seeing her face, hearing the concern in her voice, even knowing it was fake, made tears spring to my eyes. "Please, honey, you're scaring me. Just step across. Come home." "No," I said again, my voice stronger now. I spoke the third word of refusal, the word that meant, "You have no power over me." The entity's pleasant mask dropped entirely. The form of my mother twisted and contorted, her face stretching and distorting until it was the horrible elongated thing again, with too many eyes and too many teeth. The voices returned, all 20 of them, but now they were angry. "You opened the door. You invited us. You must cross. The ritual demands it." "The ritual demands acknowledgement and refusal," I said, reading directly from the journal now. "I have acknowledged you. I have refused you. 3 times spoken, 3 times refused. The bond is broken. No, not yet. You must refuse us 3 more times. 3 refusals for each victim we hold. 60 refusals total. The journal lies." My blood went cold. 60 refusals. I couldn't do 60. I could barely do 3. My legs were already shaking, my throat raw from speaking those painful words. But then I realized something. The entity was trying to trick me, trying to change the rules mid-ritual. That meant the ritual was working. It was afraid. "The journal doesn't lie," I said. 3 refusals break the bond, and I've given 3. Then give a 4th. Prove your conviction. Step forward and refuse us to our face. Show us you're not afraid. There it was. The trap. It wanted me to step out of the circle, just 1 step, to prove myself. And the moment I did, the protection would break, and I'd be vulnerable. "No," I said simply. "The ritual is complete. You have no claim on me. Leave." The entity screamed. All 20 voices screamed at once, a sound that shattered every glass in my apartment and cracked my phone screen. The hallway behind it writhed and twisted, reality itself seeming to buckle under the force of its rage. Then it lunged forward, those impossible arms reaching for me, those 2 long fingers with too many joints stretching toward my face, and stopped. The invisible barrier at the edge of my circle held. The entity's fingers pressed against the air inches from my face, unable to cross. I could see the frustration in its too many eyes, could hear the rage in its voices. "You cannot be taken unwillingly," I said, reading the final words from the journal. "I do not invite you, I do not accept you, I do not acknowledge any claim you have on me. By the old laws, by the first laws, by the laws that bound you to this place, I break our connection. Be gone." The entity recoiled as if struck. Its form began to break apart, dissolving into shadows and smoke. The voices screamed one last time, a sound of rage and defeat and hunger. And then it was gone. The hallway looked normal again. Just a regular hallway with worn carpet and flickering lights. The temperature in my apartment returned to normal. The oppressive presence that had been pressing down on me for 15 days lifted. I stood in my circle, shaking, crying, barely able to believe I'd survived. Then I heard clapping. Ryan rushed into my apartment, his face pale. "Are you okay? What the hell was that screaming?" Behind him came Dorothy, moving faster than I'd thought possible for a woman her age. "Did it work? Alex, Did you complete the ritual? I stepped out of the circle on trembling legs. I think so. It tried to trick me, tried to change the rules, but I refused it 3 times like the journal said. And then it just vanished. Dorothy grabbed my arms, studying my face intently. How do you feel? Different? Lighter? Or do you still feel watched? I took a moment to assess. The constant pressure I'd felt for 15 days, the sensation of being observed, of something waiting in the dark, it was gone. Completely gone. I feel free. Thank God, Dorothy said, pulling me into a hug. Thank God it worked. But Ryan was frowning. He walked to my open doorway and looked out into the hallway, then back at the broken glasses scattered across my floor. Something's wrong. Look at this. He pointed to my doorframe. Deep gouges ran down the wood, scratch marks that definitely hadn't been there before, 5 parallel lines on each side, as if something with 2 hands had gripped the frame. It was physically here, Ryan said. Not just a manifestation or a hallucination. Something physically touched this door. The ritual makes it manifest fully, Dorothy explained. That's part of the danger. It becomes solid, real, vulnerable, but also much more dangerous. But it couldn't cross the circle, I said. The protection held. This time, Ryan said quietly, Alex, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. During the ritual, when the entity showed you those forms, your ex, your mother, did you feel even a moment of desire to step forward? I hesitated. Yes. When it was my ex, I almost... Then it's not over, Dorothy interrupted, her face grave. What do you mean? I completed the ritual. I gave 3 refusals. You completed your ritual, Dorothy said. You broke its claim on you specifically. But Alex, think about what that entity said, that you needed to refuse it 60 times, once for each victim. That was a lie to trick you, but it wasn't entirely a lie. Ryan caught on immediately. The entity is bound to this building, it can't leave, but it needs to feed, needs to sustain itself somehow. For a century, it's been taking people one at a time, slowly, carefully. But now it knows someone has successfully refused it, Dorothy finished. You've shown it that the ritual works. That knowledge is dangerous. If more people learn how to break free, the entity starves. So what does that mean for me? It means you've made an enemy, Dorothy said. The entity can't claim you anymore. The ritual broke that bond permanently, but it can still manifest. It can still appear to you. And it might try to harm you indirectly. Through other people, through accidents, through opportunities. A chill ran down my spine. You're saying I have to leave, even though the ritual worked. I'm saying you've won your freedom, but the entity is still here, it's still dangerous, and it now has a reason to hate you specifically. Ryan pulled out his phone. I recorded audio from the hallway during the ritual. You need to hear this. He played back the recording. I could hear my voice speaking the words of refusal, hear the entity's screams. But underneath, almost subliminal, there were other sounds. Whispering. Dozens of voices whispering all at once. Knows the words now. Taught the human the ritual. Others will learn. Must stop them. Must feed. It's planning something, Ryan said. The entity knows you've broken free. And it knows that if Dorothy teaches the ritual to the next person in 4B and the next, it'll never be able to feed again. Dorothy sat heavily in one of my kitchen chairs. I didn't think of that. I was so focused on saving you, I didn't consider the larger implications. So we've made everything worse, I said. Great. Perfect. I've gone from being a victim to being, what, a threat to this thing? You're proof that it can be defeated, Ryan corrected. That's more valuable than you realize, but it also means we need to be careful. The entity is old and cunning. It won't directly attack you. The ritual protects you from that. But it might manipulate situations, might influence other residents, might create circumstances where you're in danger. As if summoned by our conversation, someone screamed in the hallway. We all rushed to my open door. The scream had come from 4C, Dorothy's apartment, but Dorothy was standing right here with us. Who's in your apartment? Ryan asked. No one, I live alone. Another scream, followed by crashing sounds. Something was breaking inside Dorothy's apartment. "Stay here," Ryan said, but I was already moving. We all were. Dorothy unlocked her door with shaking hands. We pushed inside and found the source of the screams. A woman I'd never seen before stood in Dorothy's living room, surrounded by broken picture frames and shattered glass. She looked to be in her 20s, her eyes wild with fear. "Who are you?" Dorothy demanded. "How did you get in my apartment?" "The door was open," the woman gasped. "I live upstairs in 5D, and I heard knocking on my floor. 3 knocks. I followed the sound, and it led me here, and then I saw—" She pointed at Dorothy's wall. "I saw that." We all turned to look. The wall between Dorothy's apartment and 4D was wrong. The wallpaper was peeling away in strips, and underneath, the plaster was cracked and crumbling. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Through the cracks in the wall, we could see into 4D. The supposedly empty, locked apartment that Marcus claimed was under renovation. It wasn't empty. It was full of people. Dozens of translucent figures stood in the darkness, all facing toward us. I recognized some from my research. Kyle Morrison, young and confused-looking. Jennifer Caldwell, her expression blank. Others I didn't know, dating back decades, judging by their clothes. They were all staring at us, all of them completely silent and unmoving. And behind them, in the deepest darkness of the apartment, something much larger shifted and moved. "Oh God," Dorothy whispered. "It's opening the door. The entity is opening the door between worlds. This was never about feeding, it was about crossing over." "What do you mean, crossing over?" I asked. "The well in the basement," Dorothy said, her voice shaking. "It was never trying to take people into the well. It was trying to use people as anchors, as connections to our world. Every person it takes becomes a door, becomes a way for it to manifest more fully in our reality." Ryan grabbed his phone. "We need to call everyone. Get the building evacuated. If that thing breaks through—" "It's already broken through," Dorothy said, pointing. The wall between 4C and 4D wasn't cracking anymore. It was dissolving. The boundary between the apartments was disappearing, as if reality itself was being erased. And through the widening gap, the translucent figures began to move. They stepped out of 4D and into Dorothy's apartment. One by one, their movements were stiff and jerky, like puppets controlled by an unskilled handler. Kyle Morrison walked toward us, his face expressionless. When he spoke, it was with the entity's chorus of voices. "Thank you, Alex. By completing the ritual, by forcing us to fully manifest, you've given us exactly what we needed. We are no longer bound to shadows and knocking. We can touch your world now. We can walk in it." "No," I said. "The ritual was supposed to break the bond, supposed to banish you." "The ritual broke your bond," the entity said through Kyle's mouth. "But bonds go both ways. By severing your connection, you severed one of the chains holding us in the well. We needed a human to willingly refuse us while we were fully manifested. Needed someone to complete the ritual while we were solid and real." Dorothy's face went white. "The journal, my grandfather's journal, it wasn't a protection ritual, it was a summoning ritual." "Your grandfather knew," the entity confirmed. "He helped us, fed us, brought us sacrifices for decades. And when he died, he left his journal as bait, knowing that eventually someone would be brave enough or desperate enough to try the ritual, knowing that their refusal would free us." I felt sick. Everything we'd done had been part of the entity's plan. The knocking, the fear, the ritual. All of it designed to trick someone, to trick me into breaking the final seal that kept it bound. "So what happens now?" Ryan asked, backing toward the door. All the translucent figures spoke in unison. "Now we feed. Now we cross. Now we take this building, this block, this city. We've been patient for a century, but our patience has ended. Thank you for opening the door, Alex. Thank you for setting us free." The entity itself began to emerge from 4D. That horrible elongated form, those too many eyes, that too wide mouth full of too many teeth, and it was smiling. "Run!" Ryan shouted, grabbing my arm. We bolted from Dorothy's apartment into the hallway. The woman from 5D followed, still screaming. Behind us, the translucent figures poured out of 4D like water from a burst dam, spreading into the corridor. "The basement," Dorothy gasped as we ran. We have to seal the well. It's the only way." "How?" I shouted back. "For you said it was already sealed." "Not properly, not completely. My grandfather left it accessible, left a way for the entity to maintain its connection to our world. If we can truly seal it—" We reached the stairwell and started down. 4 floors at a dead run, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Behind us I could hear other doors opening, hear residents emerging to see what the commotion was. "Stay in your apartments," Ryan yelled. "Lock your doors, don't come out." But it was too late. I heard screams from above as the entity's thralls reached the other floors. The translucent figures were spreading through the building, and the entity itself. I made the mistake of looking back. It was crawling down the stairwell, not walking, crawling. Its 2 long limbs bent at impossible angles, its body twisted and contorted to navigate the stairs. It moved with horrifying speed, covering 2 floors in seconds. We burst into the basement, and Dorothy led us through a maze of storage cages and old machinery. The basement was huge, extending under the entire building, full of decades of abandoned furniture and boxes and the mechanical guts of an old building. "There!" Dorothy pointed to a corner blocked by a heavy metal door. "The old coal cellar. The well is beyond that." The door had a massive padlock. Marcus's doing, probably. Ryan looked around desperately, grabbed a fire axe from the wall and started hacking at the lock. Behind us we heard the basement door slam open. The entity had caught up. "Hurry!" the woman from 5D screamed. Ryan finally broke through the lock. The door swung open, revealing a descending stone staircase that looked original to the 19th century. Ancient, crumbling, leading down into absolute darkness. We had no choice. We went down. The stairs descended at least 30 feet, ending in a circular chamber that smelled of earth and decay. And there, in the center of the chamber, was the well. It was about 4 feet in diameter, ringed with stones that had strange symbols carved into them. The opening was covered with an iron grate that looked newer than the rest, probably installed when the building was constructed. But the grate was loose. I could see gaps around its edges. "This was never sealed properly," Dorothy said, falling to her knees beside the well. "My grandfather was feeding it, keeping it strong. And when he died, Marcus continued. They've been sacrificing people to this thing for a century." "How do we seal it?" I asked. "Fire," Dorothy said. "The symbols on these stones are a binding circle. But it needs to be activated. The old way was blood sacrifice, but there's another method. Fire and iron and a willing soul to stand guard." The entity appeared at the bottom of the stairs, all of its thralls clustered behind it, a crowd of translucent dead people, their faces blank and empty. "You cannot seal us," the chorus of voices said. "We are already free, already in your world. Your ritual saw to that." "The ritual broke my bond," I said, standing between the entity and the well. "But Dorothy's right. You're not fully free yet. You're still connected to this well. That's why you need it uncovered. Why you've been keeping it partially open all these years." The entity's too wide smile grew even wider. "Clever, but too late. We are already manifesting on every floor, already touching dozens of people. Within hours, the entire building will be ours. Within days, the entire city." "Then I guess we have nothing to lose," I said. I looked at Dorothy. "What do I need to do?" "Alex, no," Ryan started. "Tell me how to seal it," I said firmly. Dorothy met my eyes. Tears were streaming down her wrinkled face. "You need to speak the binding words while standing on the grate. The fire will come up from below, from the well itself. It will burn through you, and when the fire consumes you, your soul will become part of the seal. You'll bind the entity permanently, trapping it forever. So I die." "You die," Dorothy confirmed. "But everyone else lives. The entity gets trapped in the well. The thralls are freed. The building is saved." I thought about Kyle and Jennifer and all the others, trapped in that thing for years, decades, forced to help it hunt. I thought about the residents on the floors above, innocent people who had no idea what was in their building's basement. I thought about Ryan, who'd tried to help me, Dorothy, who'd shared her knowledge, even Marcus, who was complicit but also trapped by his family's terrible legacy. "Okay," I said. "Tell me the words." "Alex, there has to be another way," Ryan pleaded. "There isn't. You heard her. This is the only way." Dorothy spoke the words. The real ritual words, not the fake ones in her grandfather's journal. These were older, harsher, words that hurt even more to hear than the refusal words had hurt to speak. I climbed onto the iron grate covering the well. It groaned under my weight but held. The entity lunged forward, all its thralls moving in unison. But Ryan and Dorothy held up their hands, speaking words of binding, creating a temporary barrier. It wouldn't hold long, but it would hold long enough. I spoke the first binding word. The iron grate beneath me began to glow red hot. I spoke the second binding word. Flames erupted from the well below, licking at my feet. The entity screamed. All its voices screamed. The thralls collapsed, released from its control as the binding took effect. I spoke the third binding word. The flames engulfed me. The pain was indescribable. I was burning from the inside out, my soul itself on fire. But I kept speaking, kept binding, kept pushing the entity back down into the well where it belonged. With my last breath, my last moment of consciousness, I spoke the final word, the word that meant sealed forever. The well exploded with light and fire. The blast threw Ryan and Dorothy backward. When they looked again, the well was sealed, truly sealed this time. The iron grate was fused to the stone, glowing white-hot. The symbols carved into the stones blazed with power. And standing on the grate, transparent now, barely visible, was me, my ghost, my soul, bound to the well forever. The entity was trapped below, screaming in rage, and I was the lock that would never open. "I'm sorry," Dorothy whispered. My ghost smiled at her. I couldn't speak, not anymore, but I could watch, could guard, could make sure the entity never escaped again. Ryan and Dorothy climbed the stairs, leaving me in the darkness. Above, the building was chaos. The thralls had collapsed when the binding took effect. Emergency services were being called. Marcus would have a lot of explaining to do, but the entity was trapped. The residents were safe, and I was the guardian now, forever. 3 months have passed since that night in the basement. The building was evacuated for 2 weeks, while investigators tried to make sense of what happened. Dozens of residents reported seeing figures or experiencing mass hallucinations. The official story was a gas leak, carbon monoxide that caused collective delusions. Marcus sold the building. The new owners renovated completely, modernized everything, converted the old coal cellar into storage, and sealed it behind concrete walls. But they didn't know what was really down there. Didn't know about the well, didn't know about me. I'm still here. I'll always be here. My ghost stands guard over the sealed well, making sure the entity never breaks free. I can't leave, can't move on, can't rest. This is my eternity now. I watch the building through walls and floors, watch the new residents move in, completely unaware of what's beneath them. They hear strange sounds sometimes, footsteps in the basement that no one makes, a presence they can't quite identify. But nothing dangerous, nothing that harms them, because I'm here, standing watch. Sometimes Dorothy visits the basement. She's the only one who can see me. She talks to me, tells me what's happening in the world above, tells me that Ryan wrote a book about the riverside, though he had to frame it as fiction, tells me that the other thralls, Kyle, Jennifer, all of them, woke up with no memory of what happened. They're living their lives again, free, and sometimes late at night I hear the entity below. It whispers from the well, promises me freedom if I'll just open the seal, tells me I don't have to be a prisoner, but I don't listen, because I'm not a prisoner. I'm a guardian. I made my choice. I opened the door and I closed it behind me. This is where I belong. This is where I'll stay, forever watching, forever guarding, forever keeping the door sealed. Some doors should never be opened, and some doors should never be closed from the outside. I'm inside now, where I need to be, where I chose to be. The entity knocks sometimes, 3 slow knocks from deep in the well. I knock back, 3 slow knocks. A reminder, I'm still here, still watching, still stronger than it is. It will never escape, not on my watch, not ever.